There lived a woman in a village named Varvara, who everyone considered a blessed fool. She was unsociable and unattractive, and no one even knew how old she was. Her skin was smooth and without wrinkles, but her gaze seemed as if everything in the world had long since bored the woman. However, Varvara rarely focused her eyes on anyone's face. She was too withdrawn to even communicate through eye contact. The strangest thing turned out to be that no one remembered how she appeared in the village. But after the war, everything was jumbled up and not many people left. Strangers, on the contrary, came, some stayed forever. Perhaps this woman was also among such wanderers in search of a better fate. She occupied the most remote of the empty houses near the forest, which was completely dilapidated and small, and over a dozen. No one knew how she lived or what she ate. She always wore the same dress made of coarse cloth, the hem of which was weighed down by dried mud. She smelled not of the strong musk of human secretions that don't wash off the skin, but of mustards and mold. And so once in the early 60s, one of the local guys, having had too much vodka, broke into her house. Whether someone incited him or his desire for abstract femininity was so strong that the object no longer mattered. It was a quite clear full moon May night with thick aromas of blooming grass and chirping crickets, and before that the whole village celebrated Victory Day. A harmonious played. Pies were being baked, people drank and partied. The guy's name was Fyodor, and he was 25 years old. He broke into Barbara's house, and immediately in the barn, he began to feel strange. There was a strange smell in the house, emptiness and decay. Even Uncle Sergei, the village alcoholic, did not smell like that in his dwelling. He touched the door with his hands stretched out. It gave way and opened with a quiet creak. Fyodor cautiously stepped inside, hitting his head lightly on the lintel. Barbara was short, and the doors in the house were her size. Due to the darkness, Fyodor quickly lost his orientation in space. But suddenly someone cautiously stirred in the corner, and the primal fear that darkness in an unfamiliar place induces in most people suddenly awakened the warrior and barbarian in the guy. With a short cry, Fyodor lunged forward. "Go away!" Varvara's voice sounded quiet and muffled. Fyodor could have sworn he was hearing it for the first time. Many people were convinced that the oddball from the farthest house had been mute since the war years and had never recovered. She reached out to the window, pulled back the curtain, and Fyodor finally saw her in the bluish light of the moon. Her calm, ugly face looked lifeless. "Oh, great!" He tried to make his voice sound cheerful, but due to excitement, he lost his voice, and, angry at himself for it, he vented his anger on Varvara, punching her lifeless face. "Come on, hurry up, I'm in a rush." She didn't resist, and her calmness gave him strength. Perhaps she's been dreaming of this herself. She's ecstatic and can't believe her luck, he thought. She probably hasn't had a man in 20 years, if not more. Varvara was covered in some sort of rags, like a shroud. Fyodor seemed to unbutton his topcoat, which was made of wool, but underneath it was some kind of clammy, even deeper, something that felt like nylon, smooth and cool to the touch. Finally getting angry, he tore the rags, and they cracked and almost crumbled to dust in his hands. As Varvara lay still, her arms stretched along her sides like a corpse prepared for washing. Her eyes were open, and in a moment of clarity, Fyodor noticed that they did not shine. They were dull like a doll's eye, but volcanic lava was already boiling in his blood, wanting to burst out and free him from the fire, and he didn't really care who would open the throat, a warm woman, a slobbered fist, or this great door. Varvara's chest resembled empty linen bags in which Fyodor's mother stored nuts he had collected in the forest. There was no fullness or softness of milk in her chest, and her nipples looked like rough darkwood mushrooms that he didn't want to touch. At that moment, Fyodor's consciousness seemed to split in two. One part didn't understand how one could desire this with a waxen body. It was scary and disgusting. And the other, as if bewitched, only obeyed a blind will, impulse and passion. He pushed apart Varvara's thighs with his knee. They were just as cool and gracious as wax, and with one jerk, he entered her. And the part of Fyodor's consciousness that was scared and disgusted felt like his flesh was entering not a woman, but a container of cold sour cream. Inside Varvara, it was loose, cold and damp. And now, after spilling his seed in her, Fyodor left, getting tangled in his pants on the way. He felt like he had been walking all day cutting down trees, but he attributed this weakness and dizziness to the vodka. He stumbled home and fell asleep without undressing. He was plagued by nightmares all night. He dreamt that he was walking through a village cemetery, between graves, and dirty hands reached out to him from all sides. They tried to grab him by the pant leg, and their fingers are icy and stiff. A hum rang in his ears, lifeless voices pleaded. And to me, please, and to me. Suddenly, a girl appeared on the path in front of him, delicate and small, with long wheat-colored hair falling down her shoulders. She wore a wedding dress. Froda rushed towards her like a goddess of salvation, but she slowly turned around, and it became clear she was also dead. Her pale face had greenish spots. Her once plump upper lip was half rotten, exposing her teeth, and there was no sparkle in her eyes. Come to me, she mumbled hoarsely. Approach me, they buried me in a wedding dress on purpose. I was waiting for you. Feuda woke up when his mother splashed icy water on his face from a bucket. You've gone crazy, drunkard. You got so drunk, and yelled all night as if I have iron nerves. Several weeks passed. At first, Feuda couldn't shake off the feeling of melancholy, as if heavy wings had spread over him, blocking the sunlight. He lost his appetite, desired to laugh or grieve, but gradually he recovered, came to his senses, and started asking his mother for morning pancakes again. Gazing at the most beautiful girl in the village, Yulenka, with her long, thick braids and mischief in her eye. With Varvara, he tried not to meet, but it was not difficult. She rarely left her house and garden, and if she did go out onto the village street, she clung to the roadside and looked at her own dusty galoshes rather than at passers-by. Gradually, the strange night evaporated from his memory, and Feuda wasn't entirely sure of its reality. His consciousness had formed a snowball from real facts and subsequent nightmares, and he could no longer tell what was true and what was a horrible image fabricated by his inner darkness. As winter arrived, one winter evenings, Feuda usually worked as a carpenter. His father had taught him the trade, and they both had golden hands. People from all over the area came to them. Some needed a dining table made, others needed a fence fixed, and some wanted a terrace added to their home. And then one November evening, something strange happened. There was a persistent knock at the door, as if it were an urgent matter, but when Feuda opened it, there was no one outside. The person who disturbed the family's evening peace seemed to dissolve into the icy wet snow. Only an envelope crushed by a wet stone lay on the doorstep. Looking around, Feuda picked it up. This peered inside and was even more surprised. There was money inside. Not millions, but a substantial sum, exactly what he would have asked for building a summer terrace. For the realities of the village, this was something out of the ordinary. The neighbors, together with the bills from the envelope, fell a note. Ask you to make a coffin 1 meter in length, made of oak or pine. Take the money right away, and I will come for the finished work at the first opportunity. Feuda was not easily frightened and certainly not superstitious, but something inside him chilled when he finished reading. 1 meter in length, sir, he said. It was heavy on Feuda's soul, but he still did the work. He finished it in 2 evenings. He took the best planks and worked as if he was making a chest for imperial jewels. He even decorated the lid with carving. There was nothing else to do on winter evenings. A week passed, then another, and then the third began, but no one came for the work. The small coffin stood in the already cramped hallway and made everyone nervous. Passing by it, Feuda's father said grimly, "Damn," and his mother, once tripping over it, instinctively kicked the wooden box with her foot. Then, realizing what she had done, sat down on the doorstep and burst into tears. And then one evening around years, it happened that Feuda was left home completely alone. His parents and little sister went to visit relatives in the neighboring village and planned to spend the night there. The evening turned out to be dark and windy behind the thick veil of the snowstorm. One could not see the ground or the sky. And suddenly there was a knock at the door, the same insistent, hurried knock, which Feuda immediately recognized, and the boy's heart sank, as if he was on an endless icy slope. Approaching the door carefully, he asked, but received no answer. Crossing himself for some reason, he unlocked the door. On the porch stood a short woman wrapped in an overcoat and a large woolen scarf. Feuda didn't immediately recognize her as Varvara, and when he saw her emotional's gray face, he recorded it. "What do you want? Why did you come here?" he asked in a deliberately rough tone, trying to muster his strength. "It's time," she replied hoarsely, passing by him into the house. "I thought I could carry it for a few more weeks, but now I see that I can't. It's time." "What are you talking about, you crazy woman? Out of here." Then Varvara looked up at him. Feuda stepped back a few paces, his gaze helplessly scanning the shed until it hit a small axe that he and his father used to chop firewood. "What nonsense. I'm not going to attack her with an axe. She's a weak woman. I could break her finger with a single touch." What can she do to me, poor thing, sing? And the woman just looked at him calmly, her eyes like ice-covered puddles. They were just as dull and doll-like as that night that he had been trying to forget all these months. Varvara smiled, still devoid of any emotion. What's wrong, Fedya? Did you think you could have some fun without consequences? Bring water and rags and giving birth? What the hell? And then he finally noticed the huge round belly under her open coat. It's about to start any minute. Why are you hesitating? She didn't look like a woman concerned about the birth of her first child. A bloodless calm face, wine-burned lips, a steady quiet voice. And by the way, I paid. Everything is fair. Did you do what I asked? Did you manage to do it? Fedya didn't immediately understand what she meant. But when he did, he suddenly felt small and vulnerable, like in the years when his father scared him with ghosts and bogeymen. And Fedya spent the whole night trying to calm his breathing. He imagined every rustle and creak, some other hidden life that begins in the house when everyone goes to sleep. He wanted to run to his mother, breathe in her coming warmth. But shame held him back. Why do you need a coffin? He almost whispered the last word into Varvara's face. Well, of course, she smiled. He needs somewhere to sleep. After all, the dead will be born. And she rubbed her tight belly. Fedya's head swam. Get some water, Varvara commanded, and bring some rags. It's starting. As if in a dream, he walked to the stove, took a kettle, then climbed into his mother's chest, found some old sheets. Everything seemed like a silly prank to him. He couldn't believe that the village fool really was going to give birth in his barn, that he would have to take part in it, and the damn money, and the coffin, the dead will be born. When Fedya returned to the barn, Varvara was already lying on the floor, lifting her skirts and spreading her bloodless legs apart. Her back arched like a bow, as if she had been struck by lightning, but her face still showed no fear, no pain, no anticipation. Fedya's sister was also born at home. The contractions started suddenly. It was also winter, and they wouldn't have made it to the rural hospital. He remembered his mother's flushed, sweaty face. Her guttural scream more like an animal growl, remembered how her hair matted with sweat, scattered on the pillow, and the smell that filled the room, hot thick. Visceral. How he too felt uneasy, but it was a different kind of fear. The fear of the presence of some eternal inevitability. Mother asked for water, then asked for a handful of snow to be applied to her forehead, then asked for the window to be opened, then closed. And then he heard his sister's muffled cry, and he and his father had a shot of liquor, rejoicing, and his mother looked so happy, despite all the blankets being soaked with her blood. Varvara, on the other hand, was silently gritting her teeth, giving birth to new life. She worked with her hips and back as skillful as a snake, and the barn was filled with a strange smell, peat bog, manure, damp tree roots, and earthworms. Suddenly it gushed out of her. As if a tap had been opened, water receded, greenish-brown, like a stagnant pond. Fedya had to jump back. There was so much foul liquid that it flooded the entire barn floor. He didn't even notice at first that a tiny creature, a baby, had emerged from her womb into the world. It was as grey and lifeless as its mother. Varvara sat down, wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, and picked up the baby from the floor. It weakly moved its arms. Its eyes were open and covered with a white film. Fedya looked away for some reason. It was unpleasant to look at the child. There was something off about it. It didn't even cry, but was already turning its head, clearly trying to look around. What are you standing there for? Varvara grimly called out. You need to cut the umbilical cord. Haven't you read any books? I don't know how, Fedya mumbled, almost losing consciousness from exhaustion and disgust. What's there to know? There's an axe right there. Use it to chop it up. What nonsense are you talking about? Can you really use an axe for that? I'll call Babushka Alagaskiv. A saving thought suddenly came to him. Just let me go get her. She knows how to do this. There's no need to call anyone. Varvara stopped him. Oh, the one at fault, so you'll have to take responsibility. Grab the axe. I teach you. Varvara, why does he need a coffin? Why are you saying such scary things? The Fedya couldn't hold it in. Where has it been seen for a child to sleep in a coffin? You said he would be stillborn, but he's moving. So am I stillborn. Her grey lips stretched, but it wasn't a smile. Oh, didn't you understand that? Bring a coffin and you need to rest yourself, otherwise he'll get hungry soon. When you wake up, I'll teach you how to feed the stillborn. The last thing Fedus saw before he was engulfed in the velvet wings of darkness was the old ceiling with branching cracks. When his parents and sister returned the next morning, the boy's body had already grown cold, but his open eyes still held an expression of distrustful sadness. No one ever understood what had happened to him. But the entire barn floor was flooded with thick swamp water that Fedus' father couldn't scoop out even in a day. And when he had finally scooped it all up, the smell of decay, mold, and rot remained lingering for many years, and occasionally subsiding but inevitably returning at the start of each winter. Varvara was never seen in that village again, but for many years, people gossiped that the muffled and monotonous crying of a baby could sometimes be heard coming from her deserted house. End story.